Margie, you're on mute.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our 6th workshop in the Public Service Company of New Mexico Integrated Resource Plan Stakeholder Conversation. I'm Margie Tatra with GridWorks. My colleagues Kathy Boyce and Deborah Shield are here to assist this conversation as the facilitator for this process. And we are recording this workshop as we have in previous workshops, such that people who can't be here or folks who want to listen to segments in the future can access the recording and other meeting materials. You will find all of those as usual on the gridworks.org website, and the link is below and will be included at the end of the slide deck. And my colleague Deborah has also put that link into the chat. So with that, let's begin to review what we're here to accomplish today. Our objectives are to talk about the model results since our prior workshop in April and start talking about possible implications or insights gained from those modeling efforts. The PNM team has also completed a number of the stakeholder modeling run requests and will present results to date on those. And then our final objective is to prepare all of us for conversations about the Statement of Need and Action Plan. Those conversations will begin in the next workshop, as now we're approaching the final phase of the stakeholder process, which is back at the big picture, interpreting modeling results, understanding what they mean, and informing the Statement of Need and Action Plan, which are key components of the Integrated Resource Plan. You see our agenda below, which includes some updates and question and answer sessions from the utility. Will present those results and summary of stakeholder requests and model results to date. We'll give a little bit of introduction to the Statement of Need and Action Plan in order to prepare us for the conversation in June, and we'll summarize and adjourn by noon today. With that, let me do a quick review of our workshop norms. Two things on the next slide I wanted to highlight. It is very helpful when you pose a question to please state your name and organization. It helps us keep track of the interests of those questioners. So please do that when you're asked to state your question. And something new in this list, we realize there's been some important activity from Public Service Company of New Mexico related to the 2025 recent RFP process. Just like to point out that specific questions about that will be directed to the proceeding around the RFP and are likely not to be able to be discussed given the broad stakeholder interests here today. Those questions may be deferred to the proceeding on the RFP itself. So just a heads up and a caution for folks. We apologize if your questions related to that are on your mind. We will not be able to respond to those here today. So the next slide just describes where we are in our process. I mentioned we've had, this is our 6th workshop, so we're heading into the final stretch of stakeholder engagement in the IRP. You'll see both the workshops listed on this timeline and other sessions and office hours that have supported the workshops. Two things that have happened since April. There was a April 20th office hour discussion on transmission modeling, and also the utility team has been hosting conversations with stakeholders on model run requests to be sure that the parameters and interests of stakeholders have been clearly defined, and those conversations actually are ongoing in a couple of cases, but that happened through late April and early May. So a lot has happened in addition to the workshops, and as I mentioned, we're now getting down to where the rubber hits the road and what does all this modeling now mean for the IRP itself. With that, I would like to now turn the podium and program over to the PNM team to present modeling results update. We will pause after that presentation for questions and answers, and then we will move on to the stakeholder model request, scope and status of that, followed by a question and answer period as well. So I now will turn the program over to Shane Gutierrez, from Public Service Company of New Mexico to present an update on modeling results. So Shane, over to you.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. All right, we're getting the slides pulled up.
Deb, I think you can stop sharing our slide deck, please. Thank you. All right, Shane, we can see the slides. Please proceed.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is workshop number 6. Can't believe we're already here. But we do have some things that we want to talk about today. And we could go to the next slide for the agenda for our presentations today. Really just going to review the updated modeling assumptions, and I'll get to that in just a moment. Review of the updated current trends and policies, high economic growth, and low economic growth future results. After that, we will talk about the stakeholder scenarios we've received, and we'll go through some of the results that we have come up with regarding those stakeholder scenarios. And then we will finish up with any pending analysis that we've identified that we will still need to work on leading into the next workshop. And that's the agenda for today. So the next slide just kind of again showing where we're at in the IRP process. And we are essentially at the same spot in the process that we were in the April workshop, which is essentially we're analyzing the results and we are incorporating the stakeholder request results into the collective set of results for our modeling this in this IRP. And with that, let's get into a review of the modeling updates that we've made since the April 15th workshop, and then the results, new results that we are presenting this go around. So for after review of the April 15th results, we did have a few modeling assumptions that we felt we should update. And I wanted to list them here, and we've incorporated all these modeling updates into the current results that I'll be reviewing and that we have posted up on the Venue site. So I've categorized this into two buckets essentially. One is modeling framework, and we made a couple of updates since April in this category. The first one is we've incorporated transmission cost adders into our expansion planning analysis. We had an office hours on April 20th of 2026, last month, and that's where we discussed how we were going to incorporate the transmission cost adders. So if you have more detailed questions, I'd direct you to that meeting just to make sure you are up to speed on how we were doing that. The other modeling framework related update was we made some end of study period thermal fleet capacity declines. And what that means is kind of going back to what we used in the 2023 IRP, what we're trying to show is that, and this is also a comment that we've received from stakeholders. If you notice in the April 15th results we had in 2045, the last year of the study window, we had this massive build to try, when we actually have to go carbon free, there was this massive build in that 1 year. And as a modeling assumption, we wanted to show how PNM would likely try to build into that 2045 year. And the way we're doing that is we're reducing the firm capacity of our thermal resources by 20% per year. They're still available to be operated. It's just their firm capacity contribution is reduced by 20% per year, 2041 through 2044. And this is applied to Afton, Luna, Rio Bravo, and Reeves. Two of those are combined cycle units. And this does have an impact on some of the results, and I'll get to that later on. And then we did make some modeling assumptions on operating parameters. A couple, one is generic solar capacity factors. We made some updates to the generic solar shape, make sure that we're getting a more reasonable capacity factor from the solar facilities. Bump that up a little bit to get a little bit more output. And then we had to, we noticed that a few of the data center customer approved resources didn't have any capacity degradation or panel degradation, so we applied those. They're just minor updates there. We also had some book life and forced outage rate updates for some of the generic facilities, or generic candidate resources, I should say. Pumped hydro, we made some updates to the operating life and the forced outage rates. You can see those on the screen. And then for our dynamic balancing resources, we aligned the forced outage rates with the reliability modeling assumptions utilized by PowerGen. So we wanted to align those, essentially moving those from a 4% to 8% forced outage rate. And then the last operating parameter update was we noticed that in our no ETA scenario, we inadvertently were retiring the units starting in 2045, and that was just the opposite of what we wanted to show in that scenario. So we extended the operations of those units through 2045, and that would be for our combined cycle units, Afton, Luna, and then our other large frame unit, Rio Bravo, so that we actually have operations going through 2045. And that's the summary of the modeling assumption updates that we've made since the April workshop. So let's get into now that we've made those updates, what has changed? And what I've tried to do on these slides, and you've seen these in the April 15th workshop, very similar reporting here. What I've tried to do is in the text where it's dark red or darker, those are the changes since last time. And I'll go over those in detail here. So here's the current trends and policies expansion plan. This is the updated version. What you'll notice is that one of the observations this time is that we are getting long duration storage, which is being added in 2033, 100 megawatt unit. Last time we actually had, this is essentially updated and replacing some short duration storage and some solar based on what the April 15th results were showing. But so with that update, everything else is essentially the same. We are still adding solar and energy efficiency bundles. Those are being consistently added in the study window, in the focus window, I should say. Demand response is still being added. The same resources are being selected. And firm generation resources, those are being met with procurements in our upcoming resource filing. Those would be between 29 and 2032. So it's just a minimal change to our current trends and policies based on what we saw last time. Now, when we get to the high economic growth expansion plan, we're noticing a similar trend. We have more long duration storage, and that is essentially with the addition of more long duration storage, it's adding less pumped hydro and less gas resources that April 15th results. And as we've discussed in the CTP, a lot of the other trends have stayed constant. We are still adding solar and EE bundles. The same demand response programs are being added economically there. Long duration storage in the form of hydro is needed when you move from the CTP to the HEG future. And and not only is it adding it there, but it's adding it in the focus period. So that's another one of the key takeaways that we've seen in the April results, and we're still seeing the same result here in the May 13th results. And I was a little surprised on this, but maybe not so. There really isn't any changes to the low economic growth expansion plan, even with the modeling updates that we've made. So, especially when we're focusing on 2033, 36, there are no changes. I mean, we are still seeing the same trends as we saw in the April 15th results, which is very similar to what we're seeing in the CTP and the HEG. Energy efficiency being added, demand response, but with the LEG, there are no additional resources needed with the load forecast that's the driver there. And because we made some updates, did put some slides together on the differences from what we saw in April 15th versus what's been updated. You can see on the left there on the bar chart, that's what the accredited capacity builds look like. And then on the right-hand side, this is what the updated version or the most recent version looks like. You can see that a little bit of long duration storage is added starting in 2033 that we just went over. And that has replaced the combination of some short duration storage and some solar. But generally speaking, they're very similar in the types and timing of resources that we're seeing in this expansion plan. And then as we look at the annual energy production, there really isn't much of a change at all. We're talking about rounding differences here between the two. As we made our modeling updates, the majority of our energy is coming from carbon-free resources, and that's supported even more by the next slide where we're talking about CO2-free energy production. There's really not much that has changed. Even with the modeling updates, we are still essentially at the 80% carbon-free level, starting in the early 2030s, with the remainder of that being served with some of our fossil resources. Now, given the updates, we just want to make sure and follow through on the sensitivities as well, because we updated those, not just the futures, but the sensitivities as well with the modeling updates that we just discussed. I'm talking about a few of the observations, and some of these have changed a little bit. Now, for the current trends and policies, one of the big things is the previous NPV of the current trends and policies was around $14 billion. And so what we've seen is the entire set of sensitivities, the cost of those portfolios have all gone up. This is mainly driven by the fact that we have put the firm capacity drawdown on the back end. So starting in 2041, you're starting to have to build into the requirements of the system to where we get to carbon free by 2045. That's the biggest driver from what we have seen on our side in terms of driving up the NPVs of all these. So that's one observation. The next observation is, when we look at this bar chart, there used to be, sorry about that, we used to show that the late long duration storage bar was just above the CTP. This one is interesting and for a few reasons. So what we noticed in the long duration storage sensitivity is, and maybe I can explain this. So what's happening here is the capacity expansion is determining portfolios at essentially like a 30,000 foot level, really high level, using sample days and intervals. Doing this can sometimes lead to small differences in the NPVs of portfolios when you take those expansion plans and then you run the 8760 over 20 years. The key for the late long duration viability is whether bringing in a long duration storage resource by 2033 to capture the ITC, if that's economic over the long term. That's the key there. And what these results are showing us is that when you simulate the cost of the portfolio with greater precision, it's slightly more economic to not pursue that addition in 2033. And this raises our attention on how the 20-year study window can affect the decisions made by the software. And the other thing is, this is precisely why we perform the various sensitivities such as this. And this is just to tease out the differences in the cost of the portfolios when we get down to these more precision type of runs and comparisons. The other piece, the other big observation that we've seen with these modeling updates is the no ETA case. The no ETA case, you can see it's down at the bottom. It's significantly lower cost than the CTP. If you recall from the April 15th, it was on the order of, $200-ish million difference. Now it's almost, triple that or double to triple that. And that has to do with the resources that we inadvertently were retiring before we got to 2045 in that no ETA case. The remaining observations are the same as we saw last time, and I won't go through them all, but they have actually stayed the same. You still see the same sensitivities above the CTP and the same sensitivities below the CTP in terms of impacts to cost, 20-year NPVs. Okay, next slide. And in terms of the sensitivities and comparing these by installed capacity, want to go through a few of the observations we've seen here with our updated modeling here. We are seeing minimal firm dispatchable resources needed in the focus period, which is 2030 to 36. As we've stated before, the majority of the needs are addressed in the upcoming resource application. Now, when you're looking at the bar charts on the left, the only one that's a lot larger than the other is the high EV case, electric vehicles, and it is consistent with what we saw last time. It's just adding a lot of resources because of the increased EV penetration and load it brings to the system. What we have noticed, though, is the no new natural gas sensitivity doesn't include any incremental resources compared to the CTP. Late long duration storage or late long duration storage sensitivity, it adds more dynamic balancing resources than the CTP. That's just saying if you can't get that instead of the long duration storage that we're seeing added in 2033, what would it add instead? And it's a combination of, it's really actually just short duration storage, 4-hour storage is what it's adding in its place. And then the same result as last time, TOU sensitivity is adding less dynamic balancing than the current trends of policies. And the no ETA and ETA 400 cases require less short duration storage and solar than the CTP. Those trends have not changed. And then the final slide here is summarizing the key trends. The big takeaway is the key trends that we're seeing now with the modeling assumptions. There are no changes to what we presented last time. All the portfolios meet the RPS and ETA requirements. All the scenarios and futures that we looked at are showing significant progress to CO2-free, emission-free by 2030. We are still seeing energy efficiency bundles being consistently selected in expansion plans. Same for demand response and solar additions. And if you're talking about moving from a current trends and policies to a high economic growth future, that accelerates solar and gas additions along with more long duration storage. So that is the end of this section. And the next section is to essentially review the sensitivity results that are new from last time. And let's jump into those now and cover these new sensitivities that we've performed since last time. So we said that we would look at the high and low gas sensitivity to the current trends and policies. And so what you're seeing here on the left is the installed capacity additions comparison between the CTP when you have a low gas price and a high gas price forecast. What you're noticing on the installed capacity is there is no change when you have low gas prices. That you're still wanting to build the same expansion plan, the same resources, the same amounts of dispatchable, dynamic balancing, and carbon-free resources. However, if you are in a situation where there is much higher gas pricing, that is actually changing the expansion plan and the resources that are being added to the system. It is actually increasing the dynamic balancing and the amount of CO2-free energy resources in the portfolio. So that we are seeing this impact when you make that change to that variable. In terms of emissions, on the right-hand side, as you start adding more CO2-free energy, you are seeing a reduction in CO2 emissions between 2030 and 36. On the low gas price side, you're seeing an increase in emissions, but the majority of that increase is due to the increased gas utilization in 2030 and 31. You haven't hit the 200-pound CO2 emission requirement yet, and with the low gas price is essentially trying to minimize costs by running gas more. So that's what you're seeing on this slide here. Now to go a little bit further, we can go to the next slide. Wanted to show the capacity factors or the utilization of the gas fleet when you change the gas price. At the top, you can see the annual capacity factors for our combined cycle, the CTs that we have on the system, and our steam turbine gas fleet, which is just the Reeves station. And the middle table is the low gas price sensitivity, and the bottom is the high gas price sensitivity. We'll start with the high gas price change. What we're seeing in what I am observing from this, and you can see it in the tables on the left, more renewable energy and dynamic balancing resources are driving essentially the capacity factors down for the entire gas fleet. Essentially, what this means is the operating cost for the gas fleet is getting higher, creates the need for renewables to serve more of the energy requirements of the system, and that's why you're getting this lower capacity factor from the fleet. And it's mainly a lot of it's driven by the lower capacity factors from the combined cycle units. And then in the low gas price sensitivity, it's not changing the expansion plan, but there's some slight increases in gas fleet capacity factors, higher utilization of the gas fleet at the prices in the low gas price sensitivity. But another takeaway is you're also limited by the amount of utilization that you can use, because you are still in this time frame starting in 2032. You have to be at the 200 pounds per megawatt hour of CO2 starting in 2032. So that is actually limiting the amount that you can actually run these resources. So that's it for the high and low gas sensitivity results. The other sensitivity that we performed and we said we would do, which is taking the current trends and policies and applying the extreme economic development load forecast to that. So what I'm showing on slide 20 here is the differences in the load forecast between the current trends and policies and when you layer on the extreme economic development. On the left, you can see the changes to the peak demand. And on the right, you can see the annual energy figures. So these adjustments or the differences between these two are pretty substantial. You're talking about and the other piece is it's substantial on the front end as well. So this to me this leads to the hypothesis you should see a lot of builds on the front end here, and there's a lot of energy that comes along with just the peak demand differences as well. So if we go to the next slide, what we're talking about is the results from when you add that forecast in. On the left, you'll see the installed capacity. Essentially, we're talking about doubling the installed capacity when you have extreme load growth that we've modeled there. On the right-hand side is just showing the firm capacity amount, significant amounts of new firm capacity to try to meet that load growth. Very similar to what you saw in the April 15th meeting with the high economic growth with extreme economic development. So those are very similar in amounts, and that's kind of what my last slide on that shows, or the next slide on this shows, is the installed capacity differences are on the left there. You can see the substantial. You're going from around 750 megawatts between that time frame up to more than 7,000 megawatts of installed capacity. The graphic on the right is showing the breakdown of the installed capacity by year. And what is shown is that, the significant amount of solar and short duration storage needed to serve the energy requirements. Not only do you need that, but you do need more firm dispatchable resources for capacity requirements and to meet reliability. And then on the last slide here, 3 of 3 for the sensitivity. The takeaway, and it's very similar to what we saw last time, is the incremental needs are going to be required for all resource categories. So the difference between the CTP and layering on extreme economic development, you are requiring the portfolio needs 6.6 times the amount of carbon-free energy resources, nearly 9 times the amount of firm dispatchable resources, and we're talking a significant amount, 33 times the dynamic balancing resources. You need that to shift the energy usage quickly and efficiently throughout each day. Now, just looking at the scale of these, the incremental resource needs, they do seem infeasible, and the likelihood of mobilization to try to construct these in the time frame that we're kind of looking at here, especially on the front end. But if the resources could be built at that scale, the incremental resource capacity composition is the same as we've shown in our last meeting when we presented the HEG with the extreme economic development results. And it's in the same, essentially the same composition, same consistent resource types needed across these futures. 60% renewable energy, 20% needs to come from firm dispatchable resources, and 20% needs to come from dynamic balancing. This is really just telling us that we can't just pick 1 or 2 of them. We need all 3 types of resources to economically meet the requirements of the system. And that is my last slide before we get to some questions.
Great, thank you, Shane. We'd like to open up the dialogue with stakeholders now. Any questions you have about what Shane has presented so far, please raise your hand, and Kathy and I will watch for hands raised. And if you have trouble with hand raised, please note in the chat that you'd like to speak up and ask a question. And so with that, I'd like to offer Remy Franklin the first opportunity to pose a question.
Everyone, good morning. Thanks for those results. Remy Franklin Interwest Energy Alliance. I was just wondering why the generic solar shape capacity factor increased from 27 to 32%.
Yeah, Remy, so when we looked at the results, we just noticed that the generic solar resources were providing less energy than we expected. That just turned out to be that we were using a different shape that was giving us less energy per unit for each megawatt of solar that was being added from the generic candidates. So it was really just something that was pointing to something else in the modeling, and we wanted to make sure to update that to something more reasonable or something that we would more likely expect given our understanding of what kind of bids we've seen recently, and what we expect to see from these newer solar resources on our system.
Thanks, Shane. Did I understand though that the capacity factor went up or down? Sorry if I misunderstood.
Yes,
It did
it
go
went up.
Okay.
It was around 27%. I think it's now 32% in that range.
Okay. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you, Remy. I see Chelsea and then Gwen up next. So Chelsea, please proceed with your question, and then we'll go to Gwen after that.
Thank you. Hi, this is Chelsea O'Tilling with Energy Futures Group. I just wanted to confirm, do you think the impact of changing the firm capacity value for the 4 existing thermal fleets, is that basically resulting in Encompass picking up the long duration storage that you presented on the chart of the different installed capacity? Would you attribute that mainly to that assumption of the firm capacity decline?
You know, that was a little bit harder to tease out. I would say it may have a minimal impact because your requirements are essentially being pushed forward in time. And you know, when Encompass is trying to come up with this 20-year plan, it's optimizing for the 20 years in its entirety. So there's a slight chance that it probably has some type of an impact. But then again, when we did our sensitivity analysis with long duration storage not being available until 2040, you know, that portfolio seems to show that it's a little bit less costly than if you're trying to take advantage of the ITC in 2033. So to me, this is telling me that we're essentially right at the cusp. So it kind of can go either way in terms of the economics. We're trying to bring in at least 100 megawatts of long duration in the focus period.
Chelsea, does that address your question?
Yes, I guess my only follow-up would be would it be possible to also have the updated Encompass database posted to the venue site so we can just see the changes that have been made in the model?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we talked about that. Sorry about that. We talked about that this morning, and that's something that we're gonna do probably today. It's just, you know, been a little busy trying to get these out, but we certainly will get that posted as soon as we can.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Great.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Chelsea. Yeah, thank you.
Just real quick, I wanted to thank Chelsea for asking some of these questions. They did kind of jog our mind and made us kind of look into our database a little bit more closely at certain things. So appreciate, Chelsea, you taking a look at these inputs and outputs, and posing the questions that you have for us. It helps improve our modeling, and you know, makes us think about things, get things a little bit more precise than they normally would be.
Yeah, no, well, thanks for providing all the information that you did and for answering my questions. I know there's quite a few, so appreciate the time that you did take to answer those.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. You're welcome.
Let's see, we're going to continue with the questions from stakeholders. Again, please give your name and organization in stating your question, and we're going to Gwen Farnsworth, and then Darren, you'll be next. So please go ahead, Gwen.
Hi, yeah, I have 2 questions at this moment. Gwen Farnsworth, Western Resource Advocates. One is earlier in your slide deck, you also showed that it was something about like data centers kind of eroding the capacity factor of generation resources. And I think that was related to solar, but I just wanted to hear more about that, because one thing I've heard is that like more with gas generation, that if a data center does have like rapid load drops and then load comes back on really quickly, that can cause for the gas generation like kind of early decline in that gas generation performance because of the way the gas generators being utilized. So if you could say more about what is that data center related erosion
Yeah,
of capacity.
yeah, Glenn, maybe I wasn't clear enough, but I don't it's not really related to what you were saying. It's on slide 7, and we're just talking about the updated modeling assumptions. Just to be clear, what we've noticed is in just a few select resources that we had in our model, a few of them didn't have panel degradation applied to them as you go out into time, and everything else did. Just these few select did not have them. We just wanted to update those to be consistent with everything else, being a little bit more precise on the actual resource production and expectation throughout the study period. So all we were just trying to say is those resources, and they just happen to be related to the data center customer resources that were just recently approved. Those just needed to be updated with the capacity degradation on them as a modeling assumption. So
Okay.
that was all I was trying to say there.
Okay. And then when you were talking about just kind of how certain um like the solar was actually performing, and you were talking about that you took another look at the shape of the solar resources contributing to the system. It made me wonder, if are you providing that type of like a shape, a load, like a supply shape for how storage is performing in the model, so that folks can just kind of confirm and see how is the model treating and utilizing storage.
So we're doing that in a couple of different ways. So we're providing the database, right? We've already provided the last time for the results that we talked about in April 15th. So we provided the database there. That information has the specific inputs for shapes for solar and the operating parameters for storage. Also, we are providing the outputs to show how those resources operated. So on an annual basis, how much they were operating, what their capacity factors are, their costs, etc. And then you have the utilization, same thing for storage. You have the utilization in terms of how much they're being utilized. What we've seen is that they're actually being cycled once a day, or at least our existing 4-hour storage, and any new additional resources like 4-hour, 8-hour storage. Those are essentially being cycled once a day to shift energy from the middle of the day to times in the evening when the loads are higher, the net load is higher. So that's what we're seeing. We're not actually putting a shape in for storage. We're letting the resource essentially optimize its production and dispatch, so to speak, when to operate the system most economically. But to that point, we are seeing that it's cycling once a day and kind of in that same type of vein, charging during the middle of the day when you have a lot of solar, your load is less, and then essentially utilizing the discharge later on in the day through the evening hours, maybe early morning hours even.
Okay. And so it's like, it's good to hear that it's charging in the middle of the day, that it's not just like, instantly starting to charge up as soon as it discharges, you know, at kind of an inopportune time.
Yes,
If it-
agreed. We'd be concerned if it was doing something like that too.
Okay.
Now, you know, we do look at this on all hours over the year, you know, 87, 60 over 20 years. So seasonally, it does, you know, it is kind of doing the same type of thing. It's just maybe utilizing the batteries a little differently during the different seasons. Obviously, in the summertime, you have loads, more solar production, so it's definitely charging in the middle of the day. In the winter, you're getting a little bit less solar production, but essentially, it's doing the same type of thing, charging when it can, when it's most economic, when you're taking excess energy and shifting it to times when you actually need it.
All right, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Gwen, for the questions. Let's see, Darren, would you like to come off mute? And I see you took your hand down. Perhaps you would still like to ask a question?
Yeah, I was just jumping ahead there.
Okay.
Yeah, Shane, I had a
Darren
couple
with
of questions.
New Mexico PRC. Sorry.
I'm
We asked
sorry,
you
yeah,
to give your
yeah.
name and organization.
Darren Zigich, New Mexico PRC. Shane, yeah, I had a question. Earlier you mentioned something about on the longer horizon of running the gas plants through 2045. Did I hear that right, or is it up to 2045?
Yeah, so you heard that right, and that was one of the modeling assumptions we made, but it only pertained to the no ETA scenario. Previously, we were inadvertently retiring those in that sensitivity. Now we have to make that change because that's not how we wanted to show it. We actually wanted to show if the ETA wasn't in place, you would be able to operate those resources beyond 2045. So we made that adjustment, but it was just for that sensitivity.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that clarification. And then my other question really has to do with the three categories of resources, particularly the difference between firm and dynamic resource, because my understanding is some long duration storage you guys consider firm resource, correct?
That's correct, and you know it gets a little. There are some gray areas in this, but you know we've tried to utilize our results from our last IRP. We're essentially showing that you know in order to kind of provide the type of firm generating or firm dispatchable resource type of characteristics to the system, you needed at least 16 to 24 hours of storage of storage capability to show kind of some equivalence to something that's not energy limited, like a gas facility, gas fired facility. And so the long duration storage resources that we're modeling here in this IRP, essentially it's 100-hour storage. And I believe the pumped hydro is 24-hour storage. So those fit into the category of firm dispatchable. Anything less than that, which would be the compressed air energy storage, and then 4-hour and 8-hour storage, those are definitely dynamic balancing resources. They are energy limited. But you know, as the results show, you do need a combination of everything to serve the system economically.
Well, I guess that's my question is, cannot the firm long duration storage be used as a dynamic balancing tool? Or is that not how the model is working or assuming?
Yeah, and it depends on what resource is being utilized, right? So if you're talking about pumped hydro, let's just take pumped hydro for example. Generally speaking, that has a pretty good round trip efficiency. You know, I guess I don't know if it's as high as you know, your lithium ion batteries, but it's generally pretty good. So generally speaking, you can cycle that daily or maybe, I don't know if you could do it daily, just depending on how much you're using it. If you're talking 24-hour storage, obviously you may just be using a portion of that to cycle, right? Otherwise, you're going to use the entire thing. It's going to take more than a day to charge up, right, or pump back up. So just depending on how you utilize that. But I think generally what we're seeing for the pumped hydro is that it's being utilized similar to short duration, where it's not utilized in the entire capacity for 24 straight hours, but some portion of that. And so you might be able to get the same type of characteristics of dynamic balancing from pumped hydro. So I guess I would agree with that premise. Now, if you're talking about long duration storage, which is what we're modeling iron air, that has a much lower round trip efficiency, and that is not operated the same as those other two resources we just talked about. That is what we've seen from the modeling, is that's operated more like a traditional like LM6000, a CT, where you're just going to run that for short amounts of time, maybe 4 or 6 hours, and then have it make sure it's ready for any ancillary or any other type of reliability events. But it's not modeled. It's what we're not seeing is it's not being operated one cycle per day essentially. And I don't think, from what we've seen, at least from developer estimates and from what EPRI is saying, you really aren't able to cycle that once a day either.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification. That's interesting. That changes things. Okay, thanks.
So, and Darren, related to your question, Remy's put a note into the chat. Remy, do you want to ask your question here that you put in chat, or you prefer that we read it? Your choice.
Thanks, Margie. Yeah, I'm here. I was just wondering if these terms, firm dispatchable, dynamic balancing, etc., if they actually impact anything about how resources are treated in the model, or if they're just sort of buckets of terms to help PNM talk about the different resource types.
It's just the latter, Remy. It's just to put them into
Okay.
categories that we see fit, and trying to get a higher level sense. Maybe it's just easier to explain to everybody this. You have these 3 buckets of resources. They fall into these characteristics and categories, and hopefully it's easier to understand it when we combine and get the results and put them in those categories. Hopefully it's easier to understand the types of resources we're seeing that we need to serve the load.
Thanks so much. That was my understanding. Just wanted to confirm. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and thanks
You're
for
welcome.
asking the question, Remy, because it does affect how the statement of need is written in the IRP, right? These are functions of these resources. So thanks for the clarification, Shane, and for the question, Remy. Are there any other questions for Shane for this portion before we start talking about stakeholder requested models? Yeah, Remy, go ahead. I see you have first Remy and then Glenn.
Sure. Just one other question. I just wanted to confirm that the gas CT that was selected in years 2029 and 2031 was sort of, I don't know if hard coded is the right word, but it wasn't selected by the model. It was assumed as part of the procurement that's upcoming. Is that right?
That is correct. Those were not optimized. Those are just assumed to be part of the portfolio.
Great. Thank you. And that would explain, I think, the result that you shared about the no new natural gas resources having the same installed capacity results as the CTP. Is that right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Remy. And so Glenn, please come off mute, state your organization and your question.
Yeah, sure. Glenn Weichel, Third Act, New Mexico. Yeah, this is also a follow-up on the gas turbines. So maybe I don't have the timeline right, but it seems like the last time we met, when we met in Albuquerque, the RFP that would have included these resources was maybe just going out. So does this mean that within a month you've selected these resources after that RFP, and that's why they're hard-coded into the modeling?
So know that what we're trying to model in the IRP is our best estimate of what we are proposing to file in our resource plan we're trying to show a couple of things, right? What resources that we expect to file, that we are showing that we're needed to serve several different things. We have Four Corners coming out of the portfolio. We have Reeves uh, extension being part of that decision, and then we have economic development as a big piece of what's driving these needs. So we're just trying to align with our resource plan that we are going to file.
So does that mean that the choice to use CT turbines is not determined yet because the RFP process is not complete?
You want to answer this, Lori? I'm going to kick this one to Lori. Just make sure we're being consistent on our upcoming filing and our RFP actually that we just issued. I believe it was last week or the week before. So.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
could phrase this a different way and just say that when you say estimate, the estimate includes what type of technology because it's not determined. That's what I was trying to understand.
yeah, the technology is not determined. So that RFP, the RFP supplement that we just went out for on May 1st will fill in the gap for the remaining accredited capacity that we need. So no decision has been made on what type of resource that is going to be. So the RFP will be open for 90 days. It will close in July. So bids will be due, and then we'll take the next couple of, hopefully we can do it quickly, but the next couple of months to do all the evaluation that's required in RFP analysis and go from there.
Okay, and so until then those CT turbines shown in there are only an estimate.
So just to be clear, Glenn, the
Yeah.
resource in 2031, the smaller gas turbine, that resource is a part of the decision to help serve the exit of or the abandonment of PNM's share of Four Corners. So that is needed for that portion. The resource that was shown in 2029 is driven by the fact that we have significant economic development requirements beginning in that time frame. So this is consistent. What we're showing in this IRP is you need a mix of the different types of resources to serve economic development. That's what we're showing in our modeling. That's what it's going to be shown in our filing, our resource filing. And this is why we're issuing the supplement RFP so that we can see if we can get such resources that show the best economics for our customers.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That really helps to know that the 2031 is a replacement resource.
Great. Thank you. Let's see, we're going to shift to the conversation about stakeholder requested model runs. I would like to ask if anyone has additional questions on material presented up till now, please put those in the chat. And if we have time toward the end, we will come back, but we did want to spend the next chunk of time responding to the stakeholder requested runs. And so at this point, again, please put any remaining questions, or if they come to you later in the workshop, please drop them into the chat. At this point, I'd like to turn the program back over to Thomas Duane from PNM to talk about the stakeholder scenarios. Over to you, Tom.
All right, thank you, Margie. So I'm Tom Duane. I'm currently director of PNM's Integrated Resource Planning Department. And welcome to as part of the presentation on results on stakeholder requests. These requests touch on various things, including one additional supply side technology that was not included in PNM's original option. It looked at the effect of lower technology costs on geothermal and effective geothermal addition in the portfolio. It looks at an earlier ramp down of the ETA carbon emissions limit. We have runs addressing higher levels of demand response. behind the meter solar and high penetration POD rate and time of use rate. We are covering most of the requests we've got today, but there will be a few others that we hope to cover in an open house that were received after April 24th.
Tom, your audio is broken just a bit, so we can hear you, but there's some background. Maybe you can move just a bit closer to the microphone, please.
All right, let me know if this is working better. We have some portable mics in here that I'm sitting right next to one.
Yeah,
Can you hear
that
that?
is much better. Yep, much better. Thank you.
All right, so this slide sort of gives some background on the requests that were received. Most requests worked with the current trends in policy future, although at least one collected all three futures and a couple wanted to look at the high economic growth future. The graph that's kind of shown on the pie chart there that shows the percentage of requests and which future is associated with that percentage. The graph on the right shows a distribution of the different technology requests or sensitivities or parameters that people wanted to look at. Technologies included distributed energy resources, geothermal, fusion, and SMR were key areas of focus. Other topics of focus included some reliability with SERV-M analysis, variations in the ETA, particularly ramping down sooner, gas price or availability, and tax credit consideration. Distributed energy resources and geothermal constituted the most requests. And that's kind of shown there by the number counts. So after receiving the request, this is kind of process we have been going through. We categorized those. We talked with different stakeholders. We had follow-up meetings with them to clarify the request and understand the modeling changes involved with the request and to request additional data if needed. After a discussion, a small number of requests were dropped, as noted later. We have a completed analysis of 10 requests, which are presented today. 4 requests received after April 24 require additional information or PNM did not have sufficient time to model, so we will cover those at a later date. Depending on the scenario, results cover resource selection impacts, how the NPV changes from the reference future, and sensitivities presented in April or emissions impact. So that's basically kind of talk about how do the scenarios affect the portfolio mix? How do they affect the net present value changes tied to a reference feature and sensitivity that was used for the scenario? And then in some cases, we show how the emissions are impacted. So moving on to the first scenario request, this one was listed as being part of the decarbonization subgroup. It was looking at trying to understand fusion generation, which is a technology that was not part of our original options in there, but we had a stakeholder request to take a look at it. The technology was modeled in 2 different phases. Less mature technology was modeled for 2035 and a more mature one for 2040. The 2040 parameters assume a significantly better, lower cost technology than what was seen in 2035. So it's kind of 2040 implies it's further down the maturity curve. Technology costs are provided by the requester and do not represent PNM's view of where these costs may be. We do not have an independent source for perspective on this particular technology. Requests focused on portfolio changes, cost, and impacts on the emissions. Potential locations of this technology are not considered or known. Transmission adders are not included as part of the results. We would want a better understanding of how flexible is this technology in terms of location, which is unknown at this point. So the capital costs are shown there in the green at the bottom. This basically adds fusion as a candidate resource to be selected. The capital cost is fairly aggressive. We do show them compared to small modular reactors there, along with the fixed O&M and the energy cost that we were provided. So when we go in and look at the results, the costs are pretty favorable. And what we did find, however, starting in 2040, they're pretty favorable. The technology costs starting in 2035 were high compared to other options, and there was no place before 2040 that the fusion technology was selected. Starting in 2040, however, the more favorable costs resulted in a substantial amount of fusion being selected. It added 1,800 megawatts between 2040 and 2045, and it replaced all SMRs in the high economic development case with, which is the case that was used for this particular scenario, the high economic growth. It replaced all SMRs with fusion technology because the cost advantage of the fusion was pretty favorable. So this shows kind of the delta, how the high economic growth scenario changed. As I noted, there's more fusion added between fusion and SMR. The total amount increased by almost 800 megawatts, and all SMRs were replaced by the fusion technology, which isn't obvious on this graph. In the focus period, it re-optimized the different types of storage between short duration, long duration, and pumped storage. Even though it's several years later that the fusion actually comes in. And it reduces gas, short duration storage, long duration storage, solar and wind overall. So there's a total drop in the 20-year time frame of the total capacity needed. And then this slide here basically shows the annual CO2 emissions rate. And the green line there is showing what we have in the high economic growth scenario, what we're seeing, and the orange line, because nothing comes in until 2040, the green and orange are on top of each other until that date. But you'll see that when fusion starts coming in, the emissions rate declines at a faster pace over the high economic growth scenario. And then on the right side, we're showing what the impact was on the high economic growth net present value over the 20 years, which declined by almost 850 million with the fusion technology added. And that's largely due to the significantly more favorable capital costs provided by the stakeholder over SMR technology. Keep in mind that the feasibility of these costs in the indicated time frame is not something TNM can verify, as noted previously. And that concludes this first scenario, the results. On our second scenario, we're looking at a request from the Geothermal Working Group. They wanted to look at lower costs on both conventional and enhanced geothermal. So the costs they provided were 5,100 kW for the conventional and 6,100 per kW for enhanced. We make those available starting in 2033. And there's a desire to understand the ongoing cost effect on SMR and EGS, determining whether to include SMRs as a candidate resource. So the request really focused on capital costs of the resources. The costs don't represent TNM's view, which is based on independent research. Our costs for the EGS was largely up in the $1,300 per kW range. For prospective location was considered in the analysis based on input from the geothermal working group. But we tried to make that a very favorable outcome, which I'll discuss in a couple of slides here. PNM allowed for up to 50 megawatts of traditional geothermal based on the request of an existing site south of Lordsburg, New Mexico, and an unlimited amount of enhanced being picked in 50 megawatt blocks. So the geothermal working group provided the potential locations that they had selected for possible sites. We put the conventional down in the one that's existing there, labeled LD, that stands for lightning dock. And then they provided a total of 5 sites as shown on the map. Many potential geothermal sites are quite a distance from existing transmission infrastructure, are in protected locations, and could be difficult to integrate with the transmission grid. For the purpose of this, we used, as I said, site 1, the LD site, and the one labeled site 2, NADT up there, which is very close to the PNM Saloon switching station. So in considering transmission for these, we looked at the lightning dock location, although it has the ability to get the current output down there, which is about 11 megawatts, is taken through a co-op system back to PNM in the Deming area. But it's limited and can't really accommodate additional capacity. So we looked at what if a Gentire actually built 2 PNM Hidalgo switching stations. And in that, we looked at what would be required at Hidalgo to actually take on another termination at that location. And then we looked at the length of a line, estimated the length of a line at 30 miles. And our cost estimates for 115 right now are running about $2.5 million a mile. We assumed such a line would be worth about 200 megawatts in capacity to carry that much. And from that, that location tends to show there'd be about a $500 per kW cost for each megawatt of that, or for each kilowatt of that capacity. Doing a similar exercise for the geothermal site selected near Berlin. That one has a simpler substation build out. 2.5 and the location was only about 2.5 miles from the station. So we use the same line per mile cost, but the overall total is quite a bit lower. And looking at that one, again, 200 megawatts of capacity, but the actual adder that comes up is only $71 per kW, or 200 for each megawatt of that, for each kW of the line capacity. For the purpose of the geothermal sensitivity, however, we felt that we wanted to really look at the technology more than worry about location. This transmission is largely an exercise just to show location can have a significant impact on the cost that ultimately get put in for the capital needed for the technology. In this case, we went ahead and decided to make the cost for transmission the same for both, and we just averaged those 2 numbers. So the transmission adder used with the geothermal was at that $286 per kW value shown there. And that's for both technologies. So we went ahead and added in the additional cost. The transmission adders are added to that and raised those a little bit. Running capacity expansion, allowing it to select geothermal, it did not at those cost levels select any either conventional or enhanced geothermal based on economics. As a result, we chose to look a little bit more into that and see where do those costs really stand in perspective. So we ran 3 scenarios, forcing in geothermal. We forced in the 50 megawatts of conventional at site 1, and we took another case and ran forced in 50 megawatts enhanced at the second site. And then we looked at an additional scenario where we forced in the conventional at site 1 and 200 megawatts of enhanced at site 2. With the 50 megawatts of conventional, essentially what we saw, looking at the CTP case, we had basically postponed the long duration storage by putting in 50 megawatts of solar in that focus window time frame. It postponed the long duration storage to be after that time frame. In the end, it actually added a little bit more long duration storage, but it's pretty far out in time. It also reduced some of the short duration storage later on in the time frame, and it reduced linear generation by 80 megawatts later in the time frame, and it reduced overall solar in the focus window time frame as well. So the effect was it had an effect. 50 megawatts of geothermal being forced in increased the net present value of the CTP case by a small $23 million amount. A larger amount being forced in would raise that number. And so very similar results when we looked at forcing in the enhanced geothermal. Similar impact on long duration storage and solar. Again, reduction in short duration storage and reduction in gas generation in the form of linear generation. And this one yielded an NPV increase of only $5 million over the CTP. We believe that even though the enhanced has higher costs, we believe that it was modeled with a better capacity factor, and that helps it improve its overall cost performance. So when we go and look at the one where we force in the 250 megawatts of geothermal, again, we see the long duration storage. We force that in the focus window period of 2033 to 36 there. When we force that in again, similar impact on long duration storage, substantial reduction in solar generation being added in that time frame. And this one had basically, well, it ended up being kind of capacity neutral in the end. If you look at the totals at the bottom, they pretty much sum up to what they were, but there's a little reduction in the nuclear being added, reduction in gas, some increase. There's not really an increase in storage because it traded off between long duration and short duration, although the long duration does have more energy capacity. The big change there is there's 250 megawatts of the geothermal added. And the effect was to increase the net present value of the CTP case by 153 million. Trying to put a little bit better perspective on what costs would have been needed to be selected economically or a break-even point. We did several runs where the capacity cost of the conventional geothermal in this case was reduced from 5,100 to several other levels, and basically we're finding at the 4,350 megawatt dollar per kW level that it's pretty much a break even and would result in the same net present value for the CTP case. And then same thing on the enhanced geothermal, even though that one, the numbers show it was very close to being break even already. Reduced it down to about 5,930 to show a net present value that was equivalent to the CTP case. So that concludes scenario number 2. So I'll go on to the third scenario, which was, again, tied to the decarbonization subgroup. This one looked at kind of smoothing out the transition, a slower ramp down of the requirement for the ETA. So what we basically did there for modeling purposes, we have the 400 pounds per megawatt hour that's effective now in the 26 to 31 time frame. Under current law, that will drop to 200 in 2032. So those aren't a change from what we're currently doing. But then starting 2035 to 2037, that's reduced further to 155 pounds. 2038 to 2040, it's reduced to 110 pounds. And then in the last few years of the 20-year window, reduced to 65 pounds. The next point under current law after 2032 is to go to 0 in 2045. So this creates a ramp down effect on the ETA requirement. When we look at the results of that scenario, we basically see that the emissions rates are following those lines there in the model run. And as you can see, it does ramp down following those limits for the new scenario, which is in the orange line there. The green scenario was the emissions rate we were seeing in the original CTP case. And then on the right-hand side there, the effect on the net present value of the CTP case was an increase of 349 million to accelerate basically the ETA emission limit. And when we look at this, it does look like it's largely accelerating. Things that didn't really change the portfolio too much in the end. They are accelerating baseload nuclear to 2038 instead of 2041. The focus period is accelerate short duration storage. A considerable amount was added in that scenario over the CTP, but later in the outer years, it actually does not add nearly as much because it's already got what it needs added in the focus period window. And then other observations are there's a modest reduction in gas, short-term storage, and a slight increase in long duration storage in the long run. But the net result is the scenario with capacity neutral over the CTP. Now we reran the same sensitivity. This one is looking at the high economic growth future. You can see that the ramp downs are similar in the high economic growth. The green line is showing what we were seeing for CO2 emissions in the high economic growth. And the ramp down, the ETA ramp down is pretty much the same as it was in the CTP with that same ramp down. And again, the impact shown on the right is about 360 million on the net present value. Again, this case is similar to the CTP in that it shows that nuclear ended up being accelerated a little bit. Again, it accelerated short duration storage into the action plan focus window. There's a modest increase in short duration storage overall and a little bit in solar, but again, the portfolio looks like it's pretty much neutral, capacity neutral overall. And then just looking at the same thing with the low economic growth case, pretty similar results. You see a faster ramp down, of course, of the carbon emissions in the model run over what was the LEG case there shown by the green line. And this one had a net present value impact of about 431 million over the LEG future case. There's almost no significant impact here on the build out over 20 years. Again, nuclear is accelerated a bit. in the case. The focus period, there was really no change. Slight overall change in short duration storage and solar, and again, the case is pretty close to being capacity neutral. So that concludes what we looked at with the ramp down of the ETA limit. The next scenario is focused on just looking at the high gas price on PNM's expansion plan, and I think it was basically designed to model what happened when we look at the high gas price tied to the CTP case. So that's basically the only assumption change we made here. And we see that the effect is, again, this one has the tendency to accelerate nuclear because of the more expensive gas energy that would otherwise be needed. That's out there again in the 2040 and later time frame. It accelerated the short duration storage as well, left that completely neutral after 20 years. And again, this higher gas price ended up being largely capacity neutral. This graph here is designed to show how the high economic growth price, the high gas price, compares with the starting price in the base, shown as the base there. The net present value impact of that high gas price forecast are considerable, raising the NPV of the CTP portfolio by about $1 billion. Let's see. Moving on to the next scenario, this one looked at, wanted to understand high penetration of time of use rate, potential increases in EV load, managed load, or EV load on a time of day rate, or some kind of managed charging. For this particular scenario, there were 2 runs made. One, they kind of asked for a new baseline from the CTP by putting in high behind the meter solar. So the first run basically does just that. It looks at the high behind the meter solar. The next one looks at then adding to that case the TOU sensitivity that was shown in previous workshops. And just for perspective, that TOU sensitivity includes an 80% participation rate. It's basically based on an opt-out philosophy for putting a rate, time of day rate or time of use rate in place. And the rate applies to both EV as well as any other electric use. So it's basically an EV time of day rate as well, or time of use rate. For our purposes, we did assume that electric vehicles would either be participating in the TOU or managed charging, but not both. And since the TOU is very high, penetration is very high, we basically are just working with that here. When we go in and look at what is the difference between the reference case in the CTP and then what happens to that capacity. So this is showing the capacity of behind the meter solar in the reference case, and then we go in and show how that is adjusted for the high behind the solar meter scenario. And so when we do that, the net impact is shown here. The higher behind the solar meter tends to reduce supply side solar needs, which would make some sense. You're basically adding that solar in on the customer side, and you don't need as much on the supply side then. And the net effect is it yields an NPV of about 160 million less than the CTP case. When we then go to the scenario where we add to that previous run the time of use sensitivity, we again see the solar reduction over the CTP case. And we also see that there's a reduction in the amount of DR that gets collected, the amount of gas that gets built, and the amount of short duration storage in the post-2040 timeframe. And this scenario yielded an NPV difference of about 282 million less than the CTP case on the net present value. We can see that the totals at the bottom show somewhat reduction in the total capacity needed over the 20-year time frame. So using the behind the meter cases for comparison to the one with TOU, this is simply showing how the TOU basically changed the first case. It had a minimal effect on supply side resource addition. We see the demand response actually gets selected less when you go to a TOU rate, and there's 122 million improvement in the NPV over the CTP with the behind the meter solar. So that one bullet there should be the comparison of the CTP with the behind the meter solar, not just the CTP. And that concludes a look at those two. Continuing on with some additional requests there.
Tom, we've been going for a while. I know we're going to continue on scenarios, but let's give folks a 10-minute break to stretch, get a drink, including yourselves, and come back. Just give people a chance, since it's been an hour and a half since we started. Let's give a little stretch break and be back. Let's be back in 10 minutes at 10:42 to continue the stakeholder scenario summaries. Does that work for you, Tom?
Yep, that sounds great.
Okay, we will be back at 10:42. Quick break for folks. Welcome back. Hopefully you all had a chance to get a beverage, stretch your shoulders a bit, and Tom, hopefully you had a chance to catch your breath. And so let's continue hearing about the stakeholder requested model run results whenever you're ready, Tom.
All right, I think we're ready. I don't have too many more slides here, so I'm planning to go over. I'll go through the rest of the scenarios that we ran. So this scenario kind of builds onto the previous two we just talked about. They asked for looking at higher DR penetration and over the CTP with some additional potential magnitude in it, and then including foreseeing water heater programs, which we did have as an option to be selected. So basically the scenario starts with the high behind the meter solar being changed to high from the reference, applying the TOU sensitivity, and then adding this additional DR in there. Now the DR programs in the CTP, the power saver was not being selected, nor the high water heater program. There was some DR selected that was there. So for this, we basically forced those in. And in doing so, basically, we find the results show that we see a postponement of long duration storage, again in this scenario, from the focus period window. And then more DR programs show up because they were forced in this scenario. Other than that, there was not really much of an impact on the overall build out. So for scenario number 7, again, it's similar. This one requested that we try to look at what might potentially be a virtual power plant project using a customer installed batteries. The request basically wanted to look at assuming 50% of new solar installations will have a storage component to them, and 90% of those batteries will participate in a VPP program. And then starting in 2029, they also asked that we assume 1% of existing solar installations will install a 4-hour battery, and 90% of those batteries would also enroll. So again, this starts with the high behind the meter solar, the TOU sensitivity, the previous run with the additional DR forced in, and then this VPP addition to it. The VPP is basically being modeled as a direct load control or direct battery control system, similar to some of the DR programs where PNM would be able to have a program put in place that could call on this when needed. It was set up to allow up to 60 events per year at 4 hours. Starting in 2030. So with this one, we see that, again, you get a delay in long duration storage. You're showing more DR because we forced in the power saver and water heater programs. And then that also includes the VPP in there, which in 2030 starts out at 21 megawatts. But what this table doesn't show you is that battery DLC increases up to 328 megawatts by 2045. And this is showing, again, there's not a big change in the overall capacity expansion plan. There's a slight drop in total capacity needed in the end. So when we go back to those 4 different scenarios and see how they compare to the CTP, this is looking at scenarios 5 through 7. You can see that the first one where we had just high behind the solar meter solar shows a decrease in the net present value of the portfolio of 160 million. When the TOU is added to that, it increases to 282 million. When we actually forced in DR programs, though, that weren't being selected, that tends to hurt the NPV. So in that third scenario, it dropped the total benefit down to 233 million over the CTP. And then when you put in the virtual power plant project with a high penetration of behind the meter batteries, that one has a pretty big impact and drops the net present value by 333 million over the CTP. Here we're basically showing how the actual build out by technology type changes. The behind the meter solar had a minimal impact, really no impact on the technology being selected other than to reduce the need for some solar. The time of use rate reduces the selection of demand response programs. So some of the dynamic balancing resource behavior is reduced in that scenario. Forcing in the DR program tends to postpone the need for new firm resources. So, and those are considered, so basically there you have all the DRs kind of replacing the firm generating resources. And then when you also add the VPP program, you increase the amount of that dynamic balancing resources since it's in that category. And you end up with basically a decrease still in the total renewable energy that's needed. So that concludes the scenarios we have run. We did have a request here to that we were unable to follow up with the developer. We felt that what they were looking for based on the information in the request could be covered by showing how geothermal affected the portfolio build in scenario 2. So we're basically covering this one with scenario 2. I'm not going to go through the remaining slides at this point, so I can turn it over for Q&A. But the remaining slides kind of touch on the stuff we still have to do on the disposition of ones that were dropped. And I'll let you all look through those on your own. We'll pick those up at a future open house then.
Yeah,
So
Tom,
Margie, I'll turn it back over to you.
yeah, thank you. Maybe you just want to show each slide so people see what work in progress is still happening regarding the scenarios, 9 through 12, I think. So let's just, so that people can see what they are that you're currently working on.
Okay, that would be fine. One thing I do want to point back to the original presentation sent out. These slides were incorrect. That's slides number 53, 54, and 55, and those have been superseded in this presentation. I meant to point that out back there.
And we'll get the postings updated.
Thank you.
So this one was kind of a request because there was a perception that joining EDAM actually would help reduce our reserve margin, but EDAM is not, does not provide capacity reserves to the utilities. It's really for economic operation in the day ahead market. And so we still have to go into that market with a fully balanced portfolio, which includes all reserves in it. So we talked to the requester about this and agreed it really wasn't needed. This one was looking for trying to understand how transmission connectivity could potentially help lower reserve margin, but the request is pretty complicated. We felt we couldn't get it done in the time frame. We're looking at a little bit at a very much simpler request at this point that tries to look at what happens in a SERV-M type reliability analysis if you increase your capacity to outside entity. And then these ones here had multiple components to them. Kind of wanted to include some of the stuff from the geothermal working group. Look at putting ITCs on geothermal, which we don't have in our current cases, and potentially other resources. They were going to get back to us on just exactly what they wanted there. And then we are looking at what is the difference if you do or don't have the gas in 29. And that one, they requested 2 runs that are included changes with the gas is the last run that was to be looked at. This one was trying to kind of look at gas supply interruption. We talked through this again. This is one that we really felt the SERV-M model is not set up to do readily in this process, but We suggested that we are going to be having a gas resiliency study in this, which will look at historical events that have occurred on the gas system and try to factor in the worst events we've seen. And then we also have a gas volatility study to kind of look at what can happen to price that will be performed. And that's pretty much it. So we can move on to questions here, if that works for you, Margie.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That way people, in addition to the results that you already have, just letting people know what the conversations are about the other requests that you're trying to sort out. So let's go ahead and open for questions on all the stakeholder requested model run results that Tom has presented. I see Barbara, you've got a question. Would you like to start? And then we'll go to Tom Solomon.
Yes, thank you. I was responding to the stakeholder scenario number 5, and I really appreciate more understanding of how you chose the 80% participation level, and to what extent does that reflect what PNM knows now and how much control you have, because this seems to be an area where you require customer buy-in and action. And what steps what do you need for modeling it better? What other steps does PNM need to take?
So on your first question, the 80% was provided by the load forecast, provided with the load forecast, which provided us the TOU sensitivity. Their underlying assumption in that sensitivity is a program with 80% participation. So we basically didn't change that. We just put in the TOU sensitivity to get that high penetration of TOU into those model runs. We would have to go back to forecasting to kind of understand, but I'm guessing they just wanted to include a sensitivity that had a pretty high penetration level. PNM does expect to come up with a time of day rate or time of use rate in around the 2030 timeframe that would be an opt-out program for residential customers. And assuming that the opt-out was low, then that may be pretty representative.
I guess my question is, just having the meter is not necessarily, to me, even with the rates attached, a guarantee that people will respond by whatever it is that PNM wants. So it seems to me that there's some other step that might be needed here. And I think that maybe that's something that we may need to discuss with the action plan or something else to explore that. Because if you,
so I think we actually, sorry, I was going to say, so PNM has implemented a pilot time of day program and is using that to try to collect data and understand exactly what you're pretty much commenting on there. So hopefully that's addressing your concern in terms of seeing how a small group of customers is behaving on that time of day rate, and then having data to try to support what we implement later.
right. I guess I'm just trying to understand. Well, maybe we are where we are today, and at some future point we'll look at it differently. Okay, thank you.
Great.
This is Kathy Boyce jumping in. Will there be any reporting on the pilots and for folks to see the results and how customers are responding?
I believe there will be, because we do a periodic update on the demand response programs, and there was some stuff. We did have a filing that was made about a month ago that includes some background on that time of day rate, the pilot.
Okay.
I don't have that. I don't have the details of that with me, but it's a publication that's available.
Okay,
Or
we'll
we
track
apply
that down,
them.
Barbara, and maybe provide a link in our meeting summary for you.
Okay, great. Again, just a reminder, sorry, when you ask a question, please state your name again and your organization. We're going to go to Tom Solomon and then after him, Anna Linden and Glenn. So Tom, first to you, please.
Thanks, Margie. Tom Solomon with the New Mexico Geothermal Working Group. First, Tom, Dwayne, thank you very much for running those geothermal scenarios. They were very informative. I think a real good faith effort, and I really appreciate that. A few questions. Just for clarification, I think it looks like you used 2033 as the year of first availability for both conventional geothermal and EGS. Is that right?
That's correct.
I'm trying to remember what we put in there, but I think I modeled or proposed that conventional geothermal would be ready sooner than EGS. And I asked that because second part of my question is, what was the baseline scenario assumptions? I guess I'm looking at something like slide 36. Were you all already assuming that the gas resources that you are proposing, the 250-ish megawatts, are already installed, and then the geothermal comes in on top of that? Or are you not assuming that the gas resources were there as your baseline assumptions? Could you clarify that, please?
Yeah, the baseline would assume the resources in the 29 to 32 resources, which include the gas in 29 and 31. So that is the baseline assumption.
Got it. So I guess that makes my question more pertinent then. If 2030 would be a first availability date for conventional geothermal, then that has the potential to question whether those gas resources being brought online in that time frame are needed or how they would compete with that. And that would be a useful answer to know. So I guess just to bundle that into a question, which is, or a request, I think if we're gonna run the scenario or maybe modify it at some point, it would be nice to know if conventional geothermal coming on in 2030, which I think is, at the edge of capability, how would that interact with the need to build those gas resources in the 2029, 2031 timeframe? So that's question number one. Question number two is, I think your conclusions where you were looking at how competitive these geothermal additions would be versus the current set of assumptions that you have, and you noted that somewhere around 43.50 per kilowatt was the break even for both of those geothermal resources in this time frame. That is one way of looking at what break even would require. Another way is, what is the cost of some of those competing resources, and whether those modeling numbers are, how would those modeling numbers need to change, meaning those costs going up, which I think is entirely plausible, and what would that do to putting geothermal in the money in that time frame? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the cost of competing resources are built into the starting cases, and all that information is available.
Right.
We wouldn't see that would change.
Well, they're just modeling assumptions, right? So you could model a different value for those those costs, which then might make geothermal look more attractive, relatively speaking. So for example, you're, I think on page 36, you were saying forcing in 50 megawatts of conventional geothermal had the effect of postponing long duration storage and 118 megawatts of solar. So that is a postponement, which affects NPV, but it is not a cancellation. So it's the costs still get incurred just at a later time frame. It reduces 103 megawatts of short duration storage, so that's a savings. And you reduce 80 megawatts of a linear generator. And that all rolls into an NPV very close to the CTP case within 23 million. That's how I read it. So the question is, you know, how much more expensive would short duration storage or a linear generation have to be for geothermal to be competitive in that time frame? My guess is it would have to be much more expensive than your current modeling assumption.
Yeah, so we understand your point. I think we were just trying to show how geothermal could affect the portfolio. What you're requesting is really a different request than what we've got. So
Sure. No, I understand.
Yeah. So Tom Solomon, let me weigh in. I appreciate your questions and your exploration, and we're not at a point in the process where we are accepting additional model run requests. So if you can make sense and use out of the results that have been presented or have questions about those, I appreciate your digging into some other comparisons which are important. Though we're not at a point in the process to accept additional run requests as we have to bring the process to a close. So Tom Dwayne, is there anything that you can add or point Tom Solomon to that might help him answer his own questions?
I'm not sure. He could certainly review the cost of the other resources just to make sure the frame of reference is there.
And those are
I have
available
them.
on
And
the
those are all, yeah, that's all available on our venue site. So.
Yeah, linear generator, $3,000 per kilowatt, et cetera. Let me ask one question about linear generators. What fuel do they use, or are you assuming they use?
They're utilizing natural gas.
Okay, so they're a carbon resource.
Yes, so if they're burning natural gas, there is a carbon emissions associated with the linear generators. Until you get to 2045, when that resource could just begin utilizing, any non-carbon emitting fuel.
Don't say hydrogen, please.
Yep, that I did not.
Thank you. That's about the only other alternative we've got.
Tom, other questions about the results that presented?
Yeah, one more question. I think, Tom Dwayne, you said you use different capacity factors for both conventional and EGS. Did I get that right in one of those capacity factors?
Yes, I believe we were provided a curve by, I believe we got the curve for the EGS from the working group, and we used what we already had for the conventional. But the EGS had a higher capacity factor curve with it.
Okay, I don't think I gave you anything. So you use data from the existing Lightning dock for capacity factor for conventional geothermal, is that right?
That's correct.
And hopefully it's in the most recent, like 1 or 2 years after Zanskar took over operations, right? Not going back farther in time, but it was a more troubled resource.
Yeah, my recollection, Tom, and we can verify this, but the capacity factor for like lightning dock and any classic geothermal or conventional geothermal is fairly high. I think it's like an annual capacity factor of around 85%. I believe we're using a shape or characteristics for enhanced geothermal that has a slightly higher capacity factor, maybe closer to 90%, based on some information we got. And I can't remember if it was a combination of EPRI or developer estimates, but it's slightly higher. So you're getting a little bit more production from enhanced geothermal, but generally speaking, they're fairly close. But as Tom discussed in the results, I think you're getting a little bit of bump in terms of cost benefit for the EGS as opposed to the conventional geothermal, just because of the capacity factor. And I know you had different costs for those, but that's what we noticed in the results.
Okay.
So it sounds like an action item for us with PNM is to get back to you, Tom Solomon, on the capacity factors for conventional and EGS that were used in that modeling run analysis.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
That's-
Great.
And I'm done.
Great. Thanks, Tom.
Just real quick, Tom, if you want to pull down the information from Venue, the outputs for the annual production for each of those facilities are out there on Venue. If you just want to pull them down, we can also go back and provide those. Also, just to summarize, but that data is out there for you to look at your leisure.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. I think Anna Linden, you're next with your hand up. Please go ahead.
Thanks. I have a question about, this is just a clarification. So in the first half of today's presentation, you showed us some general updates to your base case, non-stakeholder requested runs. It's all very appreciated. I want to confirm that those updates were present when you did the stakeholder runs.
Yes. All the stakeholder runs include all of the modeling updates that we first went over this morning.
So specifically thinking about the sort of smoothing ETA step down scenario, the long duration storage that appeared in the CTP in the non-stakeholder run is still present in that scenario run for the CTP case. I'm just thinking about the way you were showing the differences. So I should just assume it's there and it's not visible because it didn't change.
Yeah, if you're trying to compare like the stakeholder scenario results to, the updated current trends and policies, if you're talking about the difference tables that Tom was going over, if there is no difference between those, that means that there wasn't a change from the new current trends and policies, which does have the long duration storage included in 2033.
I'm just trying to get a clear idea of the full variety of resource types that is selected in the scenario. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And that was Anna Linden Weller from WRA. So
yes, sorry.
Thank you. Glenn, please go ahead with your name, organization, and question.
Sure. Glenn Weichel, Third Act, New Mexico. Yeah, I have a couple of clarification questions and then something maybe a little more involved with the cost of nuclear. First one is, does behind the meter include community solar?
Community solar is modeled separately as its own resource.
It's in front of the meter.
It's considered in front of the meter. Okay, yeah, so that gets confusing because we talk about DERS and community solar is DER, but not behind the meter. Okay, great. Another clarification is because I found it a little confusing because the last few slides went by really fast. Are there any scenarios in the stakeholder scenarios that force out the two gas additions up to the year 2031?
Yeah, whenever we went over, forces out the only gas addition that goes in 29.
Which one is that? I'm sorry.
So the IRP has one gas addition in 2029 included in there for 172 megawatts.
So you have a scenario that forces that out.
Yeah,
So I think yes is the
Right.
answer, Glenn.
yeah.
I'm still wondering which scenario it was because there were a lot of details that went by pretty fast.
But it's scenario 11 versus 12.
Scenario 11.
Yeah,
And that's one that's complete, or we're still waiting to see the result of?
it's really scenario 12. No, that's one we haven't done yet.
Ah,
still waiting
okay.
on some
Right.
We're still waiting on some information for that one.
Okay, so then on nuclear, this is kind of similar to what Tom Solomon was saying in terms of trading off different resources. So, having digested what's been presented today with a lot of scenarios that bring in nuclear resources, it strikes me that there's kind of an apples to oranges thing going on when it comes to costs and construction times, because nuclear costs and construction times are highly, highly uncertain. And, we've argued over maybe some variations in how you might price geothermal, but it's nothing in comparison to nuclear. What I call error bars are much larger. So I think that tends to, when we see a $5 million difference in one net present value versus another, that's just noise when you talk about maybe it's $100 million of inaccuracy or unknowns in nuclear deployment. So first I'll say those geothermal, you had to force them in because it was only a $5 million or $10 million difference. But they're probably really a lot closer than it might seem just by looking at the slides. I mean, I would consider the break even, we don't even know what it is. $5 million is like a 1/100% of the total $14 billion net present value. So what this begs is the question of, is there any sensitivity or any statement in the materials we provided so far about the uncertainty of nuclear pricing and construction times?
I don't know that there's as much a statement. There is the EPRI, what do you call those worksheets? The tag web information that we posted out there that discusses the different technologies and the estimate on when they're feasible and the cost at those times. They were data sheets you had to load for.
Yeah, they're called the technology summary reports. They're under the generic resource. You want me to put a link to those reports in the chat?
Are they in the materials for a particular workshop? I could pull them up if you know the workshop number.
They're on Venue, Glenn.
Okay, on Venue. Great, thank you. And then my last question has to do with just details of modeling geothermal, because I continue to be a little confused about dispatchability of geothermal. So I think you're running an hourly model for capacity expansion in Encompass. So it even confused me that you're using a capacity factor curve as an input, because from hour to hour, how do you just cut back the capacity by that amount? And do you assume that geothermal can be ramped up completely and ramped down within an hour, or what's the geothermal assumption?
The curves tend to represent what's viewed as the maximum output, their input by month, and represent the 24 hours of the day. So it's assumed that they vary. The curves tend to show they vary some with ambient temperature, but otherwise, they're pretty much putting in I would call it a fixed energy amount for the month is defined by the curves.
Okay, so do you assume that the geothermal can ramp up and down on an hourly basis?
They're not currently modeled that way, other than how the curve would ramp them.
The
They're
lightning
not
duct-
being, no.
Lightning duct doesn't in actual reality. There's steam cycles, and you can't really ramp steam cycles up and down that way and not take a penalty on maintenance and destroying your cycle. So they're not flexible like in that sense.
Okay, yeah. So I guess the summary is they're a lot less flexible than a gas plant, even a CT gas plant.
Yeah.
Yeah, Glenn, we're trying to model the geothermal technologies as we expect them to be output, and the best information we have are monthly curves that change by season because ambient temperature has an impact on their output. But generally speaking, they're operating, at full output, and the outputs are changing because of ambient temperature. So that's the best way to model that is by way of a curve, an expected output production from each technology. And for this one, it's we're focusing on EGS and plastic geothermal. So that to me, that's the best way to show how that type of resource impacts the portfolio and the cost of the portfolio.
Okay, yeah, now I get a clearer picture. So but since you don't probably operate with any temperature data within Compass, then the curve is time-based, with sort of organized around seasons, assuming temperatures are changing with seasons, or maybe daily, even night to day.
It's a combination, seasons and the time of day.
Perfect, thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Those are my questions.
Great, thanks. Good questions, Glenn. Thank you. We are going to, Darren, you're next with your hand up. Just a comment. I see an individual in our meeting with the initials AT. We'd appreciate you identify yourself and organization so we've got you properly informed about future workshops. So whoever's AT, please give us your name and organization in the chat. And Darren, over to you.
I have to give her piggyback ride if I see any.
Darren, please go ahead.
All right, thanks. Yeah, quick question on the behind the meter DR and DER model runs. Does any of the net present value include any assumptions for distribution upgrades that may be necessary? Because I had noticed you had transmission upgrades included with the geothermal, but are there distribution upgrades assumed for the behind the meter resources?
I would say the answer to that is no. When looking at technologies in an IRP, it's really difficult to say what you might have as actual resources to work with in the future and whether they'd go on parts of the system that required upgrades. We do have a few feeders that are fully loaded with resources today. There's of course a lot that are not, so it really becomes
Situational.
kind of situational. Most of the stuff being asked for here tends to appear as a decrease in customer load. But if you also have significant solar on a feeder, that could become a problem because that solar may be counting on some of that load counterflowing it. But it's very difficult to assess that in an IRP. There's just not, we're not looking at specific resources and locations in it.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you, Darren. That was Darren Zigich from the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission. His question. Other questions, please raise your hand, or if you're having trouble finding the react button, please put your idea in chat and we'll call upon you to express your question verbally. Kathy, I'll look to you to see if there's anything that we have missed.
Nothing that I'm seeing. Thank you.
Remy, please go ahead with your question.
Thanks, Margie, and thanks everyone for the really thoughtful discussion today. I was typing this question, so I'll go ahead and send it in the chat as well in case that's helpful. But I'm just curious about how PNM gets from the scenario and model results to the preferred portfolio, and if the preferred portfolio is sort of likely to become the CTP portfolio, or if it's if there's more of a process to that, sort of looking across scenario results at any investment decisions that were made across the sort of portfolios with different scenarios and sensitivities. I know that's sometimes called sort of least regrets investments. So, you know, knowing that the future is uncertain and we can't predict all of the future, you know, drivers in terms of load growth or other variables that we're modeling and sensitivities. What are the sort of common investments that show up regardless? So just curious if you could speak to that. I know there's some of it on the key trends and takeaways. And anyway, but within that bigger question of how we go from these results to a preferred portfolio.
Yeah, I don't know that we have a full answer for you there. The CTP has tended to focus what ends up being called the most cost-effective portfolio in the past. We've had some initial discussions on, is there a rationale to change that, and what would be that? I think the concept you have there of thinking about things like, is it really giving you the least regrets portfolio, is something we would certainly try to understand and consider that kind of a concept in coming up with what would be the MSEP. So we're not fully able to answer your question at this point, but I think we'll be moving to the point where we are going to be starting to focus on the statement of need in the action plan, and that is a very pertinent question to that activity.
Yeah, and Tom, you might want to talk through with your slide number 69 at this point, based on Remy's question, to it kind of outlines your next steps. Would you like to do that? I think it's slide 68 and 69. Maybe that would help people know what's going to be the next set of conversations.
It's coming. Yeah, it just takes a second to.
No worries.
There we go. So basically, yeah, the things we would still need to do is look at these portfolios and define. We haven't done the reliability analysis to make sure that basically meeting our 0.1 LOLE reliability requirement. So that is something we tee up to PowerGen, who does the SERVM runs for us. And that is something we will present then in the future on the future cases. We also have the remaining stakeholder scenarios, which we've already discussed here to run. We're looking at trying to define and provide some information on customer impacts, which hasn't been fully completed here yet. There's some things here on qualitative analysis, which plays very much into the question we just heard. What things will really help to influence the determination of that MSEP? And then completing that determination, coming up with the draft statement of need, and then the draft action plan are all the activities that the next month and the one after that will be pretty focused on. And that's pretty much what I have there.
Yeah, great. So Remy, your question is right on track. We're going there next. And as Tom Duane just mentioned, that all the answers are not available yet, but that is work in progress. And so stay tuned. We're glad many of you are still thinking back up at the big picture. What does all this mean? That is exactly where we are in the process, and how we come to both a statement of need that is drafted by the utility and then input for stakeholders to that is something that Kathy's going to give a little overview in a moment to that. Let's see, and I see, oh, Brian, thank you for turning a note to Glenn that where he can find the generic resource cost information and probably lots of information about the generic resources. So Glenn, you'll find that in the chat. Any other questions about stakeholder requested model run results? I don't see any additional hands. So let's ask Deborah, would you please go ahead and share the GridWorks slides? At this point, I'd like Kathy to give folks a little bit of a preview of these next conversations and how they relate to what was asked for in the New Mexico IRP rule regarding stakeholder input. So could you go back up to slide 7, please, Deb? I guess 6, sorry, one more. Yeah, Kathy, so over to you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Margie. And thank you, Remy and Tom, for a perfect segue. So this may be a familiar slide to you all. We're refreshing it from earlier in our work. The areas for stakeholder input, and this is directed by rule, really the modeling request, the statement of need, and the action plan. And the last several workshops have taken that deep dive into the modeling details and the results that we've been talking through. So now we're going to, in the coming weeks, we're going to pull back out and do look at more of the summary sort of decision making on statement of need and action plan and seeking stakeholder input as PNM makes those decisions. Next slide, if you would. So taking the rule language and kind of summarizing it into plain language for you, the statement of need and action plan, just so you have a good sense of what these are about and what's entailed. The statement of need is a description of the resources, both type and amount, that PNM needs to reliably meet customer demands and state policies. And again, that's kind of plain language from the rule. It is not an assessment of just peak load. It should take a broader view of the evolving needs of the system. So load growth, renewable energy programs, customer programs, a broader view. And it's to ensure that a future grid that is both cost effective, reliable, and meets the state policies. And then the action plan is the specific steps over the next 3 years to implement the resource plan that comes from the statement of need. And so this is to include actions for new generation, whether it's competitive bidding or contracting activities that PNM intends to take. And also is to include a status report from the prior action plan. So that's kind of by rule, and then putting this, implementing this to our work directly. Statement of need is over a planning horizon of 20 years. And so for our purposes here, that's like 2026 to 2046. So a very broad window. The action plan then is the immediate next 3 years. So we're looking at 2027 to 2029. But also heard from PNM last workshop that immediate 3 years, given the long lead time for a lot of these resources, is just not sufficient to bring these resources online. So a lot of the activities in the action plan will be working towards the focus period of 2033 to 2036. So action plan are the activities in the next 3 years to secure the resources needed for 2033 to 2036. And then you'll see the background reading. We'll drop that into the chat for you. That gives you the direct rule language if you want to look at it precisely. It also will give you a link to the PRC ruling where they elaborated on the new rules for resource planning. So if you want to look at some of the thinking from the commissioners when these rules were put in place. And then lastly, it also, the most recent IRPs for each of the 3 investor-owned utilities. There are links there that you can go take a look at what did they use for their statement of need? What activities did they suggest for their action plan? So give you some examples of what have these looked like in past efforts. And I'll just conclude by saying action plans in 3 previous work has been somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 13 items. So as you're thinking about how many activities, seems like a sort of a reasonable range, somewhere about a dozen is what we're looking towards. So again, this is kind of precursor to get you all ready for statement of need and action plan that we'll be tackling in the next workshop. Margie, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. I think we should open up questions from stakeholders about statement of need action plan. And before we do that, let me ask Tom, Shane, Monique, Lori, Brian, anyone from the PNM team, Brian, even Ben Elsie, I think, is online. Anything that you are thinking of regarding your process that to go forward from the model results that you are collecting to the statement of need and action plan? Is there anything you wanted to offer as people are thinking about this before we open up to questions about statement of need and action plan?
Yeah, Margie, this is Ben Elsie from E3. Do you mind if I go?
Please.
Yeah, so I think it's extremely important as we think about statement of need is to consider that modeling effort here is all based on generically priced resources. So we've heard from Glenn and Tom Solomon today, questioning some of the cost assumptions for geothermal versus SMRs. It's really important to notice that's just based on generic assumptions, which is PNM's best guess at those resources or stakeholder informed cost assumptions. Ultimately, the statement of need is going to be indicative of the types of resources that PNM need during the focus period. So that's going to be perhaps firm, dispatchable, carbon-free resources. But ultimately, the decision is going to be made from future procurements. So coming out of this statement of need, I don't want anyone to be under the false illusion that the resource types identified would be exactly what PNM go and procure. It will be based on competitive procurement that follows the IRP by rule.
Hang on, I think we just lost Ben. I don't know if the room can hear us.
Yes.
Looks like we somehow went offline.
No, we can hear you and we heard Ben. Yep.
RG, I can see you talking. We can't hear you. We've lost our audio, so we may have to rejoin maybe to try to reset it. I don't know what happened to it.
We are still
So
hearing
if you guys can hear us. Oh, there we go. You're back.
We can hear you.
Okay.
Yep. We
I
can
don't
hear
know what
you
just
and we heard
happened.
Ben and we heard Ben's remarks. So please go ahead, Lori.
Okay. Just the very end of your remarks, Ben, if you wouldn't mind repeating, because the conference room went offline for some reason. There was a glitch in here.
Absolutely, Laura. Yeah, I was just reiterating that the statement of need is built upon generically priced resources. And ultimately, the resources that PNM go to procure in the future are going to be based on competitive procurements in which you receive real resource options at real cost assumptions. So some of the comments that Tom Solomon and Glenn had earlier on, the true price of SMRs versus geothermal will actually be addressed in that procurement phase, which is required by rule.
Yeah, that's correct. I think that's a great point to make. I think we must procure resources through a competitive bid solicitation. So we do not have the option to go out and directly contract with. It's got to be a competitive procurement. So again, we've got an RFP right now out. So for folks who want geothermal in, please be encouraging those geothermal companies to actually bid. We are not getting bids from them at all. So again, that's where it kind of falls apart. This is all indicative pricing and all indicative technology and timeframes and everything else. But the rubber will meet the road with the developers in what they're willing to contract for. And so we really need to see those come through these RFPs. So those of you that are working in advocacy type organizations with developers, that's really what we're hoping to see come through are these technologies and hopefully those getting developed out there.
Great, thank you. Let's open it up to stakeholder questions about this last conversation on statement of need and action plan. If we have a few questions, we can take those before we tell you what's up next in our plans for workshop number 7. And perhaps we would like to query folks on their appetite for an office hour before then to hear the updated results from the rest of the stakeholder requested runs. Other questions about statement of need, action plan, where we're headed next? Okay, let's, Deb, if you'd go to slide 10, please. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's go with number 9. I've got my numbers wrong again. So what's ahead? We've got 2 hybrid workshops coming up in June and July, which we are strongly encouraging in-person participation if possible, because the conversations are really the culmination of our work together. Workshop 7 on the 17th of June, we'll be hearing that those results of those analyses that are underway between now and then, including the customer impacts, the results of reliability results, discussion about the most cost-effective portfolio, and then how all of that informs a statement of need. We will begin that conversation in June, and then we will give stakeholders some time to think and ponder and discuss offline so that at workshop number 8 in July, we can complete the statement of need and action plan, gathering all stakeholder input on those and hearing from the utility on what input they're able to accept, what input may be a stretch or input that might be important for action plan instead of statement of work. We will complete our work there in workshop number 8. And then we do have a virtual workshop planned in August to really close out all the work, review all the key elements of the IRP, hear back from the utility team about any unresolved issues that we're still, that will be included in the IRP report, which is required. And then finally, we will be contacting all of you for feedback on this process in September. But that is what's happening next. Again, strong appeal for people to attend these hybrid workshops in person. A note, in June, we will still be meeting at the CNM facilities in Albuquerque for workshops 7 and 8, but workshop 7 will be at the Montoya campus in the Northeast Heights, as opposed to the Workforce Training Center down near the Journal Center. So please be alert to the announcements that Deb sends out on location. Just to let you know that June will be at the Montoya campus of CNM and July back down near Jefferson, in that area of Albuquerque. So with that, the next slide now shows that these materials and the written summary and recording will be posted on our website. We'll get from PNM an updated slide deck because we noted a few corrections to the materials presented today. We'll get that posted. The next workshop is the 17th. Here is the location. We will provide a WebEx link, but as many of you know, sometimes virtual participation can be less satisfying than in-person conversation. So please encourage you to attend in person. We will continue to digest and understand the implications of modeling results to inform the statement of need and action plan. So before we close, let me first of all thank all the stakeholders for your excellent input on modeling requests. We know it's been a lot of work to articulate what your interest is and then work with the utility team to define the parameters for a run that is both meaningful for the stakeholder and, as we've seen, also insightful for the utility team. So that's been an excellent process. We thank you all for engaging in that sort of messy process, but that is what this work is about. And a big thanks to the subject matter experts from PNM and their consultants for helping bring those modeling requests to clear definition and result that will inform the statement of need and action plan We realize it's not been a process that you can always predict what's going to happen when. So thank you for participating in these processes. And I would like to first ask Kathy or Deborah if there's anything we need to cover, and then I will turn the program over to the PNN team for any closing remarks. So Kathy and Deb, anything we need to close out here in our workshop?
Nothing for me, thanks.
Deborah, anything from our attendees that we had, any mystery attendees that we're trying to identify, or anything, Deborah, from your end? Okay, Deborah might be handling some other details.
I'm good, Margie. I've gotten most of everyone's organization and email except for AT, which I will see if I can investigate that.
Great. Okay. Again, our participant who's listed in WebEx as AT, we'd love to have your identification in the chat with name and organization. Thank you. With that, Tom and team at PNM, any closing remarks you would like to offer before we let folks go for the day?
No, we just really like to thank people for participating today, and we do value your input. The things you're interested in are very much shown through the stakeholder scenario runs, and we'll be working on how we put all this together. But anyway, we look forward to our next engagement and moving the whole process forward. So thank you.
Yeah, just one loose end. So our GridWorks and PNM will put our heads together, and it sounds like an office hour to present at a minimum the pending stakeholder requested runs, so that those can be digested and available in advance of the June workshop is something we're strongly considering. So if you have a strong opinion about that, please let us know by sending me an email or Deborah an email. But sounds like we're going to plan to put something together to allow those results to be presented. Unfortunately, we can't announce a date today because we're not sure when those will be ready, but we will keep you informed. Please watch for emails from Deborah Shields, and we'll keep you posted on that activity when it gets scheduled. Great. Well, thank you all for being here, and have a great rest of your day, and continue to do the good work and participate in these processes. It's important to the state of New Mexico, important to all customers, and very important to the utility. So thank you again, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.